Welcome, everybody. I'm going to hand it over to Chrisanne, and then it'll come back to me, but just happy to see your faces in all the times and places, those of you who are listening in the future as well. Welcome.
Right, and we're so glad that you're here. And my name is Chrisanne, and I'm an admin at ASI. And I'm going to go over some of the community agreements and guidelines for these ASI webinars. These community webinars are here to support our members and mission of spiritual integrity. We ask participants to stay connected, accountable, sensitive, and skillful when engaging today. We ask that you agree to create and maintain safe space for learning and growth. To that end, we will refrain from marketing or self-aggrandizing while avoiding inflammatory or deliberately destructive comments. If you want to recommend a relevant and appropriate resource to attendees, please do so in the chat box. ASI will remove participants who engage in harmful activity after one warning. Thank you very much for creating this community with us, showing up with presence, attunement, and self-awareness. So back to Kimberly. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you. Well, deep breath, everybody. Just feel yourself into this moment together. This community gathering, which had a wonderful response. We have a really lovely crowd, I know, listening now and listening in the future, responding to this topic of entheogens and spirituality. Let me share, as a board member, an ASI board member, maybe some expanded intentions for this as we hold this together. This is a community meeting. This isn't a webinar. So we all have expertise. We're coming in circle. I'm not giving a lecture about this topic as an expert. And so we really are in a circle. This is a community meeting. And so thus we are not here to convince anybody else or set a policy. You know, I'm coming to you as Kimberly, also a spiritual teacher and leader and student with experience, more of a first person. So that's how we're gathering. All views are very welcome. We are listening with big ears also as an organization and as a community for how we can best support the needs and desires of our community around this topic. So I encourage us all to hold a sacred space together in conjunction with ourselves, past, present, and future, with whatever our ancestors or lineages, with the plant medicines as they exist in relationship to each other. You know, that we hold confidentiality so that we can really express our needs and our desires and our interests and our experiences around this topic, which goes back through our cultural history, spiritual traditions, religious traditions, human traditions. It's part of our humanities. You find the use and mention of entheogens throughout time. We also, I'll just share, inherit our own cultural introjects, we would say, or stories or trappings that are alive in us. And I acknowledge that, whatever they are, whether we hold a more indigenous seed or less, you know, we have these stories that we've inherited, and I recognize those too. So we're going to begin with, let's talk generally, open space for a few minutes around the topic of entheogens, of sometimes called psychedelics, but are not limited merely to psychedelics. We can pop, if you have a working definition of how you perceive entheogens, I invite you to pop it into the chat box. Those of you who know me know I love an active chat box. I love a good sidebar. So maybe we want to begin with, we don't have to get an agreement on the definition, but an understanding that there are different ways we could define entheogens are psychedelic substances that what? So raise your hand if you'd like to contribute to the definition of entheogens and spirituality. Let's have a little conversation before we go into breakout groups around how we're thinking about this big picture. We have some beautiful things in the chat box here. I feel God is in everything, even what we as society call drugs. Thank you. Expand the mind, not alter the mind. A bridge to wellness. And as you hear these, like expand, I invite you to expand and make room for all of them. Expand and make room for all of them. Shift and expand our understanding of consciousness. Stimulate unity consciousness. Unlocking inherent wisdom. Connect us to our bodies, to each other, and to the divine. Let the ego go. Let the ego personality take a sidebar. They are living invitations to encounters with source and good. A bridge to the God within. Entheogens are God's grace for coming to terms with the human disaster. A return to truth. Opportunities to heal, open to new perspectives. Okay, well, this gives us a flavor of the general feeling of this group, right? Of entheogens and spirituality. How else are they intersected? How else do they link? Who would like to let spirit move through them and move into your voice? And raise your hand. You have such beautiful sidebars. I'd love to hear your voices. Phil, why don't you come on and say that out loud while I prepare some breakout groups over here.
Putting me on the spot.
Yes.
I was reminded of something the great scholar of religion, Houston Smith, once said, and Houston was part of the work being done by then Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary at Harvard. But he said, ultimately, the goal of spiritual life is not altered states, but altered traits. Making the case for transformation and not just experience.
Aho, so hot. Jump on in there, Rick.
Unmute myself. Yeah, so playing off of Phil's comment, when we announced this webinar, somebody got in touch with me, someone whom I've interviewed on BatGap and who has been a ASI member and significant supporter, and said, wait a minute, why is the ASI promoting drugs? And I said, I don't think that's what we're doing. This is, the ASI is about integrity in this contemporary spirituality, and like it or not, these substances are part of contemporary spirituality. We're not promoting them. We want to just discuss the ethical issues in this particular aspect of the spiritual community. And we went back and forth a number of times in emails, and he just couldn't get it. So he resigned from the ASI. So I just wanted to bring that up because if anybody has even a shred of that kind of concern, it ought to be addressed. And we want to be really clear about what it is why we're doing this. And I see that Sarah Siegel is with us. She has been very involved I had a brief conversation with her a while, and then Jack has had many, and she's been very involved in the issue of ethics in the psychedelic community. And so that's why this is relevant to the ASI, and I'll welcome any comments anybody wants to make about that.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, let's keep having this conversation. And I love all your sidebars and all the chat box, because it really gives us a feeling and a flavor for where this community center of gravity is coming from. And if when and if you feel differently, please speak up as well too. All is welcome. Okay.
I also want to mention that Jules Evans is with us. Many of you may know Jules, and he's a significant writer and contributor to the thinking in this world. And hopefully we'll be hearing from him as we go along.
Thank you. And I know there are others as well that I intend to call out that have such expertise here. Thank you. Celia, I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name is Celia, and I'm coming from this topic as a spiritual practitioner and a teacher, but actually with regard to the medicine, I'm a recovering drug addict. I've been clean for 25 years. I have a history of trauma. And I was seeing a therapist a few years ago because I just got to a point where the 12 steps were not touching my depression. I had gotten sick and was struggling to get well. And this therapist introduced the idea of trying plant medicine. And I sort of freaked out. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm a drug addict. And she said, well, yes, and there is a lot of research and evidence that psychedelics and plant medicines can assist with people with history of trauma and also drug addiction. So I did a lot of research. I spent 6 months doing my own research around what this would mean if I started to integrate plant medicine, psychedelics into my recovery journey. And eventually got to a place where I could feel that the medicine was calling me to do this, that the medicine does speak. And if we listen, there can be a relationship there. And there's also a 12-step group for sober and clean addicts and alcoholics who are integrating plant medicines and psychedelics into their recovery journey, which is pretty amazing. So that was 2021. And since then I have been introducing and integrating psychedelics and plant medicines into my life. And I would just say, like, what they have become for me is a bridge to what I was already doing, which is spiritual practices and recovery work to be well with a history of trauma and a history of addiction. The medicine just, it's a bridge. It just, like, I don't have to work so flippin' hard all the time just to be okay. And this is a huge gift in my life and a gift in many, many, many other people's lives. But it is a relationship. It is a relationship of listening, deep listening. How is the medicine calling me? What medicine is calling me? And it's an ongoing process of accountability. And I would say, relationship with medicine and others who are on the journey. So thanks for listening. Thanks for the topic.
Celia, that's so beautiful. I'll just share something that came through on chat, and then we'll move to you, Rose. This is from somebody who's anonymous, but said I could share. They're just coming out of retreat, of solitary retreat, and they also had a recent experience with plant medicine. The question, is the medicine necessary, popped into my head, and a metaphorical answer came and wanted to be offered. We can get to enlightenment on our own 2 feet, walking or jogging or running, but we can also occasionally, intentionally get on a bicycle and potentially get further, faster, maybe with a bit more risk of a stick in the spokes and a fall. But with care, maybe we can get a bit farther, a bit faster using that technology. Rose?
Hi, this is I actually participated in the podcast from IANS on Friday, and that's how I found out that you existed. And this is my first time here, so I'm going to say I'm a virgin. It's the only time I can say that. But I do have a tendency to be funny. When I went to my second degree Reiki, you know, for my attunement, I remember sitting outside with my Reiki master and said, "Oh my gosh, if young people knew how high they could get off of spiritual energy, they would never do drugs, right? Like you can get so high off of spiritual energy." I mean, I had those wonderful experiences, but I also know in my heart too that we as a society have really kind of isolated the people that have done drugs and things like that, you know, and I feel like if they are doing them, they're doing them because maybe it's a coping mechanism until they felt peace. So I just, as I kept growing more spiritually and I went into course teachings and all that and realized that, and I asked the angels a question, and you know, there was a certain point where I had been told something from one of my spiritual teachers, and you know, something posed a question. They said, does it matter how you get to the light as long as you get there? That was what the angels said. It doesn't matter how you get to the light as long as you get there. And, you know, I don't know, I feel compelled to say that. So right? Because it's so easy to go into judgment. But if the person's intention, if everyone's intent is pure enough, that's what my heart says. It's your intention that really creates the experience. Anyways, thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Rose, of pointing out that intention. And that is one of the questions we're holding is, does it matter how you get there? And how are we looking, you know, from all angles? Let's ensure that we're holding an ethical view as well, whatever that means, as we move through it. Sarah.
I'm really appreciating this conversation so far. It feels so rich and important and very dear to my heart. So I guess I just want to just kind of share a little bit about myself before I just, I want to share an article by a mentor of mine, Dana Sawyer. I'm someone who has utilized plant medicines also to heal from a really severe addiction at one point in my life. And I'm a certified alcohol and drug counselor, and I'm trained in ketamine-assisted therapy. I'm going to be trained in January as a spiritual care provider in ketamine-assisted therapy. And I'm also a spiritual care provider with Iboga, which is a medicine that comes from Gabon in Africa and inside of a lineage, the Masoko Bwiti lineage. And they've been using Iboga since the dawn of humanity. And so I'm just sharing that because I feel like we're at a time where, you know, there is this convergence of, you know, cultures and lineages, and the medicines are here and they're alive and they're in our communities. And one thing that I've realized with one foot in the clinical arena, and I'm also an ordained interfaith minister, is that there's a lot more people are talking now about how the medical model can't really hold the mystical experiences that people have with plant medicines or entheogens fully. And so I think that we really need spiritual care providers who are willing to kind of be educated and support people in these in these powerful places. And so I just wanted to share, I hope it comes through. This is a link to this article that Dana Sawyer wrote about, it's what is the unitive mystical experience triggered by psychedelic medicines and experience of, an exploration of Aldous Huxley's viewpoint in light of current data. And so it's a really interesting article about the therapeutic value of mystical experiences. But anyway, that's just what I wanted to share for now. I'm really enjoying this meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for your support and guidance in asking these questions. Hi, Jerry.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for this discussion. So far, we've spoken just in very general terms and not very specific about the specific um, medicines and how they're used. And I wanted to comment, you know, I think it's, you know, a given that people respond to these in different ways. And some people may not be well suited um, and may have, you might call, you know, adverse results. And some people may be better suited for one modality than another. You know, many, many years ago when I was a teenager, you know, I'm 72 now. It was the thing to do to quote unquote experiment with psychedelics. And I was, you know, desperately unhappy and um, um, disillusioned with the civilization that I found myself in the midst of, and um, found that I did about, I think, 12 or 13 trips with LSD and one with mescaline. And really, I would have to say all but one of them were bad trips. And, you know, I had various experiences. Two of them, however, I had very, very clear experiences of unitive awareness. And I thought to myself, well, that's what I want. That's the, you know, that's the promised land. That's what I want to, I want to, that's how I want to experience the world. But these uh, psychedelics are not going to be, at least not for me, and for many of the people around me. I could see people were getting burned out and you know, getting you know, various degrees of you know, sort of um, going haywire. And so I thought, well, this can't be a path, but it's given me some insight and potential direction. And at that point, I learned meditation. And eventually, after some years of meditation, that exact same unitive state became an all-time feature of my experience. And I can think back on what was it like on those two uh, psychedelic experiences. It's the same. It was absolutely, it's the same unitive experience. Well, you know, my brain chemistry is a bit fragile anyway. And I've had a lot of depression in my life, even despite the fact that there's this baseline experience of unboundedness that many people would say, oh, you couldn't possibly be depressed and have that at the same. Yeah, you can. Um, and I thought, well, okay, there's something about psychedelics. All right. And the experience that I had, you know, when I was 16, 17, 18 years old would have been kind of the sledgehammer approach. You know, what happens if we use these things skillfully, right? And I thought, well, I am not a person who could, you know, go into a, you know, a psilocybin, you know, perfectly set up, you know, Johns Hopkins University Medical School setup and take the dose of psilocybin that they're using very, very successfully in those studies and trials and in that therapeutic setting. So, well, what about microdosing? I've been microdosing for about 4 years, and I've microdosed with various different natural substances, and it's been an absolute godsend. The tendency toward depression is far, far, far less. There's something quite magical about it. The days that I microdose are often days when things just sort of materialize, just the synchronicities and the, kind of coincidences that bring things um, in a line, that are supportive, that are helpful to anything I'm trying to do, are just stunning. And there's zero experience that you would call hallucinogenic or psychedelic when I'm microdosing. I completely forget that this is, I'm microdosing today, except, something will happen that I've been thinking about or wanting to try to get done or something like that, and it'll just show up on my doorstep. Holy cow, how did that happen? And it reminds me of the in the ninth mandala of the Rig Veda that talks about soma, and they talk about these plant substances and all of the and worshiping it and what incredible magic powers it has. And they say soma, the Soma is the giver of horses and garments and kingdoms and all of this. And I think, whatever they were dosing with, in the culture that wrote down that Rig Veda, um, they must have been having a similar experience, that somehow or other it opens the consciousness in a way that allows the universal connection to facilitate things that happen and things coming. And I will say I've had to be very systematic about the dosage. One study that I read, that was one of the early studies on microdosing, found that there were some things that improved on the psychological tests, but they also found an increase in neuroticism. And I can attest to that. If I have just a little more than what seems to be optimal, I will feel rattled, and I'll feel rattled for several days. So it's not a totally benign sort of thing. It's a medicine, and it does have side effects, and it does have risks. And so people need to be mindful going in, but it has tremendous potential. I think even world-changing potential in the extent that it allows people, in some cases, to dramatically open up their perception of the world and humanity and the interconnectedness of life and karma and all of that. So anyway, that's my testimony.
Word. Thank you, Jerry. Carrie, hey. Kay Lafferty.
Hello. Thanks everyone for your shares. There's so much wisdom and experience in the group, and it's so beautiful to be in this space. I just wanted to presence one thing that was coming forward. For me, I'm a doctor of Chinese herbal medicine, and people are talking about these plants as medicine. And I think it's valuable to think about what we mean by medicine. In my training, any substance that, like, the more potent it is to create a healing, it also can it's creating a change. And that change can go either way. And if we're really noting and feeling and sensing its capacity to change us, and all healing represents a change. We have to be grounded and ready for what change may come. And that medicine also is not best employed on a experiment level. Medicine it does benefit from some context and some expertise. and some set and setting and some intention. And that also brings up who will be the leaders and who's allowed to be the leader, who is the doctor of this medicine. And I think that we understand that there's a long indigenous tradition in almost all cultures of working with plant medicines. And then a Western desire to do a lot of research. And I just want to presence a concern about my concern about making sure that we are remembering the roots of this medicine and elevating the perspectives of the traditional practitioners of the various substances, if not above, at least alongside any correlative research that we might do from the, scientific community on it. And that the substances all substances have the capacity to change human chemistry if we ingest them, including, sugar, green tea, anything you might eat is going to create a shift. And just wanted to bring that forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. Okay. I love all this wisdom, and I know there's so much more. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move into more of a first-person experience now. Stay together in community. Watch any attachment habits that might come up when you are invited into a breakout room. But here's what I'd like you to do is go into a breakout room with a smaller group, and I invite you to share in more of a your first-person relationship to what entheogens, medicines, psychedelics, assisted plant medicines, or there are certainly other psychedelics that are not derived from plants, other compounds, your relationship to that and spirituality from your own perspective. And maybe you've participated with these substances and you would like to share something generally about that. Maybe you haven't, and that in itself is the story. What's your training and context and culture around that? So really sharing. I invite you to be vulnerable, knowing to be vulnerable is to be strong. Keep your confidence, and then we'll come back and kind of mine the learnings, okay? So. Okay, deep breath. Wonderful. Hey, Rick.
Howdy. You want to say anything, or should I say something?
Jump on in there. Go ahead.
I just want to say, this came up in our little thing. There were only 2 of us on our little group, but I just want to say that I want to make sure that in this meeting we get to the ethical considerations, because you hear horror stories of people going down to Peru and getting raped or something by some so-called shaman, or being ripped off in some ways. So there are considerations about the qualifications of people, the certification of if anything, of people. How does some newbie who just wants to try this know what they're getting into, and what kind of safeguards can there be?
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Yes, it is definitely, the intention of this meeting, as we're processing our first person experiences with it and getting a sense of where we are with it, to acknowledge that and then move into more best practices without making recommendations, right? What we can all share and learn as a community, and then what emerges from that, right? And what are the ethical considerations? One thing, speaking as just to you as Kimberley, not as an official ASI board member, more vulnerably in my own experience, I've come to this traditionally more on the conservative side, partly to do with growing up in the 415 in the 70s and 80s, growing up with psychedelics and the New Age very much part of my culture. I almost went the other way. My primary spiritual experiences all happened off of any substance. And so that's what I held to and have held to for a long time, without being anti anything, and able from that to hold space for a lot of my friends and students and colleagues and peers who were experimenting with this. More recently, that's shifted, and with the culture and with the maturity that we now have and the wisdom we now have around the field, I have personally been exploring best practices and seeing how plant medicines and different bicycles, shall we say, can assist and also can be harmful, right? Can assist and be harmful. One thing I'll share, I have the fortune of working with, I think of them like a psychotherapeutic supergroup that are very spiritually informed. And the general consensus there was from the practitioner side, if there are acute personality disorders, it's not a good idea, moving into best practices. But so from the one who's partaking side, things can get bigger, so that we're sort of normal crazy, not crazy crazy. Where there's a balanced psychological assessment wouldn't show acute personality disorders, and that's a diagnosable thing. And that we won't get into now. So I'll throw that out there. And there's a lot of other experts here in the field that I'd love to hear from you as we're moving into, what does it look like when it goes well? Also, Sid.
Hi, everybody. I think there's a gift we can offer in demystifying this whole area of psychedelics, especially now when you can get ketamine online legally throughout the United States for $5 a journey. And same thing with psilocybin. In a lot of the states and CBD stores, you can get a gummy and for about the same price. And I think demystifying it is helpful. I think in terms of, for those of us who are contextualizing it within the non-dual self-realization, with knowing our true nature and abiding in this and supporting others in finding that we can talk about it in just an ordinary way, almost as if we're talking scientifically about Buddhism. I think there's a real gift we can do in that. I think what Rick was just saying and the ethics of it and going down to Peru, I think it's easy. I think there's this whole other side of psychedelics. Oh, an ayahuasca journey, we're singing, we're doing all of this, and that's kind of a different story. But I think it can just, the conversation can be simpler. That's what I got.
Yeah, jump on in there. Don't wait for me. Go ahead, Ragda.
Yeah, I guess just a quick little bit about me and my medicine journey, if you will. I don't have any like significant background of trauma or addiction. I consider myself a true seeker and mystic, and so have done ayahuasca several times, really as part of my awakening journey. I say that because I do think the person that just spoke before kind of referenced this, but the intention, what your intention is so important, I feel like, when you're starting to work with any kind of medicine. So if it is clinical depression versus, a mystic who's seeking enlightenment, I feel like it's just very different, right? And then the context and the setting and the medicine that you would use, it's all, I think, of course, so important. And then I was in the room with Rick, and Rick was starting to mention the certification, and Rick, I was getting ready to like reply to that, but then our time ended. I just wanted to bring this up too, and I would love to hear the thoughts of other people. Like, certification, I feel, can be so helpful in so many ways. And then when I consider a medicine like ayahuasca, then I start to feel a little fearful around, anybody just becoming certified to be a carrier of the medicine ayahuasca, because, if you are going to from what I hear, I've actually not done it in Peru or Costa Rica or in the Amazon. I've always done it here in Florida. But the people that I've done it with, the shamans that I have done it with, they were either born into this lineage of being a medicine keeper for ayahuasca from a very young age, or at a young age, they committed to it. And it's a lifelong commitment and practice for these shamans. And so just to have someone do a whatever 6-month certification or 2-month or 12-month certification, and then boom, I don't know, I feel a little fear around that. So just curious what other people have to say about that. And thank you so much for this. This is a great conversation.
Love that. Love that. We'll come back to that. Let's come back to that too. I've got some thoughts on that. Sunshine. Give us your sunshine.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be in this space with you today. I wanted to address Rick. Thanks for bringing up the heartbreaking incidences of people being exploited while under the influence of what I consider medicines, and should be looked at with reverence and respect because they are so powerful. And I've done a lot of my own research on some of the bigger headline events that have taken place around the world with people who should be in a space hold and to heal trauma, but are actually contributing to more trauma. And it's like a double whammy. You're so vulnerable in those spaces. And it's just so heartbreaking. And I'm glad that we're talking about, resources. And I know there's a fine line between, promoting places that we trust versus kind of self-promotion. I'm retired. I don't have any skin in this game, but I do have my own experience working with one company in particular that is nobody's perfect, but they really invest in being trauma-informed. And what that means to me is, like, when someone has a bad trip, they know what their role is, what they should and shouldn't do, especially in terms of touch, how to put the person who's having the bad trip in control, in a place where they can ask for what they need to feel safe and come back into their bodies. And I'd like to see a lot more organizations really invest in that. I had an experience with not that organization, but another organization that also has a really good reputation and isn't really a company per se. It was a one person who had done several dietas, trained under maestros with ayahuasca, and has a place in the Sacred Valley in in Peru. And in this particular retreat, we were there for a week and drank ayahuasca 4 times. And I was still getting my training wheels in terms of learning how to work in that. I think of it as kind of like a safe zone, and it's controlled mostly by the dose. And if the dose tends to be on the higher end and the force of medicine is strong, I can use my own tools to kind of come back to my body and use my breath and all of my meditation practices. But this is before I learned a lot of those. So I was way over that comfort zone for me. And I had a trauma come up around sexual abuse. And when this came up, it ended up taking pretty much the entire 4-hour journey. And I was trying to be strong and not ask for help because it was a very small group. I think it was 6 of us who drank that night, and the 2 Shipibo curanderos and the facilitator. And by the time I needed help, it was too late. And I was ready to basically just cry the hardest cry I've ever cried in my life. It was like giving birth. It's like there's no stopping it now. It's gonna come out and it's already hurting. And so I raised my hand, and the facilitator, bless her heart, she's a friend of mine, again, really good intentions, not nefarious. But she came over and she said, Sunshine, how can I support you? And I said, I just need someone to hold my hand. And she couldn't, because she didn't know how to sit with her pain. She hadn't sat with her pain enough to be able to sit with somebody else's. So she sat with me for a few minutes, and then she said, I'm going to go get the maestros. And I said, I don't need them. I know what I need. I just need you to hold my hand and I can get through this. And she said, well, I'm going to go get them anyway. So first boundary crossed, right? So she goes to get them, and they start putting their hands on me. And I'm like, I won't get into the details of what my experience is. We'll just say it exacerbated that pain like tenfold. And I asked them to stop, and she whispered in my ear, because she was in this role of superiority, that the shamans are at the top and that we should just respect all their experiences. And she said, let's just let them finish their process. And my heart broke deeper than I think I'd ever experienced heartbreak and despair. And I realized, like, there was no one who was going to help me. And so I gave birth to that baby with the layer of feeling basically like I was being re-traumatized. I am fine now. I'm so fine now. But what it taught me is that even in situations where people have good intentions, we can do great damage. So thank you for letting me share that.
Go ahead, Keller.
I'm so grateful that you shared that, Sunshine. It's, set and setting is everything. The ability of the facilitators really matters. Also, being trauma informed, I think, is so important. I feel very blessed that when I started working with medicine in 2021, after 20, at that time, over close to 20 years of sobriety, that I had an excellent facilitator. It was also a very small group. It was just my husband, the facilitator, and I. And I wanted to put this into the mind stream of the group as an experience to sort of to talk about, what can and can't happen. And I was reading the chat, and it's, around mental imprints and, karmic seeds, I can't override that. In my experience, I just wanted to share is that it can overwrite some of these things. So I walked into my first experience with heart medicine, which was most likely MDMA derived, although it wasn't pure MDMA, and without knowing anything or having ever done it before. And it created an opening in which my husband was able to say things to me that he'd been saying for years about the things he loved about me. And I was finally able to hear it and believe him. And it shifted my self-view, how I saw myself as a person. I walked into that conversation, and I genuinely mean this. 20%, I think I'm a good person. 80%, I'm convinced I'm an asshole. And I walked out of that one-time experience 50% sure I was a good person, and 50% sure I might still be an asshole. But I was able to get at something really difficult in my experience, which is interjects, things that have been said to me. And it took me about a year of working with it to realize finally, and I was able to dislodge these interject of I'm an asshole. Like, where did that come from? And it was my dad. And it wasn't him being harmful or abusive or anything. Anytime I had a need, he would say, don't be an asshole. And then, like, come on, let's go get on with it. And I had taken that literally as I'm an asshole. And it had informed who I was. And I was constantly second guessing myself in life, concerned that I was really screwing something up, and that, it was just a matter of time until I figured out that I was an asshole, and I could clearly see this pattern. So in my experience, it really did overwrite something
a harmful imprint from childhood that wasn't, wasn't a trauma. I have trauma too, but that wasn't traumatic, but it informed my self-belief. And just from that year of experience, I want to say it was like a miracle for me in terms of my relationship with my husband also, but most importantly, my relationship with myself. And the second guessing, which used to take over so much of my brain space, I can say genuinely now is 80% empty. That self-checking system isn't there anymore. Because I know in my bones I'm a good person, I work within an ethical frame. And I know exactly when I overstep it and I have to make repair because it's too painful to live the other way. So I just wanted to put that into the group conversation around a positive experience with heart medicine. Thank you.
Heather. Okay, so I'm tracking what's happening in the chat box as best I can too, and encouraging those of you who are calling for the next us to move in the conversation to the issues that might come up, to bring them, get your voice in there. Let's hear what you mean. One thing to tie some threads together, which I think is addressing one comment in the chat box too, or at least is to ensure we are in the, like we wouldn't, one of my teachers used to say, be careful who you give your spiritual real estate to. For example, choose your teacher wisely, right? Choose what you were exposing our mind to wisely. That's what becomes our spirituality, our practice, our ideas, our community. And psychedelics are probably, and finding people, shamans, legitimate shamans, which may or may not be what I might mean by that, may or may not be what you think, if that makes sense. But to find somebody that understands the medicines, holds a lineage of wisdom somehow in those medicines, and has the expertise to hold us through these explorations we may be going on, both as individuals and as spiritual leaders and as teachers. What example are we setting, and what are the best practices and ways to do that? And I know there's a lot of expertise in the room as well that I'd love to hear from. And look who's next, Sarah. Love to hear from you.
I love what you said, Kimberly. It reminds me of Gampopa, who is an 11th century tantric Buddhist master. And he says, be careful who you give your nose rope to. And I always really like that. So, yeah, and I appreciate what you just said, because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this with one foot, like I mentioned, in more of like a medical model training with ketamine, and then another in more of in a lineage training that's definitely, coming through indigenous roots as a white Western woman, meeting that. And so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, the differences in ethical practices. And one thing that often comes up for me is, in like with Iboga and the indigenous perspective, it's really important that you have a direct relationship with the plant itself, not only ongoing yourself, but while you're holding space. In the more Western model, it wouldn't be appropriate if I was taking ketamine at the same time that my client is taking ketamine. And so, it's really important to just kind of feel into these differences and honor these differences. And often I find it hard to find spaces where they're really being talked about fully, broadly, and really honoring a lot of the nuance. But just really practically speaking, I think a lot of kind of more Western, psychological concepts like transference and countertransference can be really helpful, both for the provider and also for the one taking the medicine, like really understanding that these medicines tend to really augment and highlight a lot of our projections, just like the projector of the mind becomes really visible. And so as a guide, are you able to receive that? Are you able to hold that skillfully without making it about you, without taking it in? Can you really be a mirror, for the person that's ingesting the medicines? So I think as a guide, it's really important to know that. And also it's profoundly empowering for the person taking the medicines to really understand transference and countertransference. And I did see Jules Evans was talking about that also in the chat. Yeah, so I think that's really important. Something I've been thinking a lot about in my informed consent is the difference between safety and comfort. As a Vajrayana Buddhist practitioner since I was 16, I've really been working for a long time with this idea of like, what does it mean to be uncomfortable, and how important, as I'm disrupting my conditioning, my kind of maladaptive conditioning, my, obsessive attachment to I, me, and mine, like it becomes really uncomfortable when I'm doing that. And so medicines often will create uncomfortable experiences, but are we safe? Is the provider, is the space safe? And like, what does it mean to really inform somebody about the difference between comfort and safety so that they actually can consent as much as possible to the experience? And then lastly, I'll just say, I also use a modality that I think can be really helpful. I'm trained in internal family systems. So there's lots of different tools that we can help support people with also when it comes to informed consent. Anyway, I don't want to hog the space.
And more to come. Sarah is helping us champion this inquiry at ASI, and that all of you are contributing to now. Alon.
Hi there. Yeah, my question is around, so if what we're talking about is integrity within the context of use of psychedelics, I'll just call people sitters rather than shamans, people that are sitting and holding space for people with the use of psychedelics. How can we create more integrity within that space? And within the business space, there's the Better Business Bureau, which is a forum for people to talk about issues that they're having with businesses. Why is the ASI not, or maybe this is already happening, why is the ASI not creating a forum? That seems to me like that would, and I spoke to Philip about this, and there was like, oh, it's a lot of work and there's moderation, that sort of thing. Honestly, there are forums that are not moderated and they're still valuable, where people can say, I had this positive experience and I had this negative experience. And I, as a reader, can go and see, what did Alon do? And did he do something good or did he do something not good? And just read about it and have that be an informed process for me to choose.
I would modify what I said earlier by pointing out that ASI has a Facebook page in which a lot of conversations take place. I see no reason why we couldn't host such a thing, but I'm not technologically sophisticated enough to know what really might be involved. Maybe Rick and Kimberly have some comments on that. But I would love to hear from people what else they think ASI can do. And I'd like to know before we leave what people in the field are doing and are concerned about.
All of the above. Thank you. Alon, will you complete there?
Okay. Sorry, it just to tack on to what Philip said, what else could ASI do? There's a comment in the chat by Carrie that I think is great. A user's guide, what to look for in a leader, the positive and negatives that the leader has.
Yes. Yes, my tongue is heavy with words, but let's let others speak. We've got about 10 more minutes here.
One other thought I wanted to present from the perspective of thinking of this as a medical system is also at what point are we done with the medicine and able to stabilize the realizations on our own, and we can have these realizations. I had a major spiritual realization 10 years ago and a major 3-day long state experience, but I had no teacher then. And it kind of messed me up to be unsupported in that just as much as any mushroom trip I could ever have, so there is a beautiful place. I think the ASI is uniquely qualified to hold for the stabilization of realizations and integrating them into moving forward in life and stabilizing those changes being as important as what happens in the 4 hours themselves, which I also think are super important. And as a Chinese medicine, a doctor of Chinese medicine, there was such harm was done when Chinese medicine was licensed in this country to the Chinese doctors who came here and taught us the medicine. They were not allowed to become licensed. Only the people they taught were allowed to become licensed. And it's really important in any space where we might be looking at not repeating that harm, and even maybe trying to atone for it by doing it much better this time.
Why was that, out of curiosity? Why couldn't they become licensed?
Because a bunch of I don't want to say this in an unfair way, but a bunch of white people studied Chinese medicine and said, well, this should be certified. And they wrote a bunch of multiple choice tests in English. And multiple choice tests are really, really hard for Chinese speakers to take. The syntax is, and also to write as a student of many Chinese medicine teachers. And they didn't have the English language skills to become certified in the medicine that they taught their students. And they were imprisoned, like Dr. Miriam Lee, if you want to look into the history of it. This went on for like 40 years. And Chinese medicine only became officially legal around the United States over the last 25 or so years. So this is really, there's really a history of how not to do it. And as important as it is that not every Yahoo in the world just run around putting needles in people, there's another side of it too, which is how do we not say, well, yeah, the Peruvians have some nice ideas, but we have the research and that's real. And even in saying the word demystify, I want to destigmatize, but I want to be cautious not to demystify, because this is a mystical realm of experience, and a mystical realm of experience is not less real than the materialist, rationalist realm of experience. And when research is done, it's so beautifully interesting how it can correlate, how it can illuminate, and how it can validate for people who need it to be validated. But it's not actually validating it. It's helping certain people be able to feel safe in the space. And that's really beautiful. And that's really important. But in my perspective as a 25-year practitioner of Chinese medicine, Western research into Chinese medicine doesn't validate it or invalidate it. It just provides another perspective on it. And so I wouldn't like for this medicine and this realm to move into the double-blind protocol validated, static, materialist, rationalist realm where I'm not certain it belongs to live. Although there's nothing wrong with looking at it from those perspectives for your own edification.
Can I add something to what Carrie said? Because I think what she gave us is a very useful metaphor for cautionary proceeding with caution and proceeding with openness. The other thing that happened in the history of acupuncture in the West, after Nixon went to China and people learned about acupuncture, it was practiced at first only by MDs, and they didn't have to do much more than take like a weekend seminar. And the status of those people, because, oh, they can use needles and they're scientists, was such that it made it very difficult for non-MDs to get this medicine, this ancient system off the ground in the US. They almost were able to have a monopoly. And there's something very similar going on, I would think, in the psychedelic world, where with the researchers and the institutions wanting to be protective and coming at it with this status. And of course, on the other hand, you, as Carrie said, you don't want people running around sticking needles, and you don't want people running around saying, "Hey, I'll help you. I'm a guide. I took a 2-hour workshop."
Absolutely. David, go ahead.
It's wonderful to be here and to hear all of you and all of your stories. I am a plant practitioner with some background and some experience. And I don't think that you can come to this work unless you hear very deeply within yourself, come to this work. And until you hear that, you should wait. And if you're going to work with anyone in this space, you should ask them, did you hear that? Were you called to this work? Have you been in this work? Have you spent time in the mystery? You know, show me. You know, show me yourself. I think those are really important questions. And I think that there are people that are called to this work who aren't clinicians, who aren't, you know, with a deep and long history and lineage. They come to this work because, like all of us, you know, on this screen, we're spiritual beings. And we've spent a little bit of time listening to ourselves. And some of us are fortunate enough to be in communities of other spiritual beings, or as Ram Dass would say, our soul pod, you know, where we can communicate with one another and we can hear the spirit speak in each other's voices and we can sit with each other. So, you know, we're entering into a period of great expansiveness, you know, in the world, and tremendous sickness. And this medicine is here to help us heal. This medicine is here to help us see life differently. And I think that one of the things we should do, or consider doing as practitioners or people curious about this work, is ask ourselves, you know, what part of our shadow is standing in the way? You know, how do we know if we should be doing this work? And I do think the word should can be used from time to time. And if anyone here in this channel is nearby another person, close enough to sit with them at a cafe, or, you know, around a fire, sit with them at a cafe and around a fire and have this conversation and consider entering the mystery together. You know, be your own teacher. I feel really fortunate to be here with you today and to hear your stories. And I am very grateful for the medicine that it called to me and said, come and sit and learn. So listen, thank you.
So beautiful to hear all your voices. Thank you, David. And there's something moving through you that maybe wants to come out in these last few minutes together. Ron, can you say that out loud? You're muted. I would love to hear you say that out loud if it's possible, or I can read it for you as well.
There you are. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I was going to offer to share a publication of mine from the Journal of Psychedelic Studies. It was published in 2019, just before I retired. I was a faculty member at Penn State Abington for the last 23 years of my career. And Rick Archer probably remembers me from MIU, since he was a graduate student of mine back in the 1980s. Hello, Rick. In any event,
Hi, Ron. I remember you.
The essay is a personal story of how psychedelics changed my mind and shaped my career, even though I have not done psychedelics since 1969, although I am supportive of their use. I would appreciate hearing from other people who have had comparable experiences. My experiences were rather traumatic, and like I said, they've had a lasting impact on my life and my career. And if you'd like, I'll give you a link to the article.
Please do.
Okay.
Please do. Fantastic. Good to see you. And
I was glad I can make the meeting.
yeah, me too. Rose? I see we're over time here, you all. If you need to go, thank you for coming. Otherwise, Rose, would you like to?
Oh, I was just wanting to be, I think it's kind of interesting, like, because David and I were just in such contrast. I was getting ready to leave, and then I'm so glad he shared, because I do believe that he definitely serves people well. I just feel like for myself personally, at this point in my journey, I just don't feel called to facilitate that. But my job is to love people, my clients, and love them. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's all I wanted to say.
Appreciate that love at the end, and to be continued. Let's continue the conversation. Please, I guess the place is the Facebook page. That's the place, right? Board, team, that's the place for people to talk.
So far, maybe we'll come up with something even better, and we'll send out an email to everybody. And if anybody in this call isn't actually an ASI member and would like to be one, go ahead and sign up and you'll get on the email list.
Awesome. Let's do a link to the Facebook page. Ray Bratcher. They're asking for a link to the Facebook page. Ray will put one in the chat box for you. He doesn't know yet, but he will. And yes, thank you. I feel like I'm leaving us on bated breath. Still so much to share, and perhaps if you benefited from this and like this, the ASI is dependent on the donations of its sponsors as a nonprofit. So I encourage you to make a donation webpage if you'd like to. And we can also continue this conversation in further community meetings. If this is something that's of interest to you, let us know. We're always wanting to do this for you and together with you. So thank you so much. Great to be together.